friends. I'm Karen, and this is the Family Food for Moms podcast. We're talking about inspiration for family cooking and dining. Today, we're going to talk about seasoning as part of our skills that we should all learn in order to become better cooks. We're talking about how to season different kinds of food, how to understand seasoning, and to get the best results. This may or may not be one part, it may become two. Let's see how it goes. So last time we talked about heat control and how to make sure that you use the correct heat for whatever you're cooking to get the best results. So today we're going to talk more about seasoning. So salt, spices, and herbs, layering seasoning, understanding the role of salty, fat, acidic like citrus, using herbs, using spices, and then knowing how to layer your seasoning throughout your cooking time. And then being able to season your proteins, your vegetables, starches, soups, sauces correctly. Develop your skills of being able to taste the food and then adjust, like knowing what it needs to be added, and then avoiding some common seasoning mistakes. So what enhances flavor? So the top 5 would be salt. That enhances your flavor. Fat kind of carries your flavor with it. Acidity brightens and balances your flavor. Heat or spiciness adds something exciting to the taste. And then aromatics builds your depth. So salt, let's talk about salt. You get sea salt, table salt, Himalayan salt or mountain salt, flaky salt that you have to grind or use intentionally as flakes. There are many different kinds of salt out there. So table salt is not great because it's been very refined and then it's got strange things added that are not necessarily good or useful. So sea salt is great and Himalayan salt is great. Do what you like to use. Sea salt works well for finishing a dish. So at the end of your cooking time, try to season with sea salt. But any other salt that you use, try to get a feel for how salty it is so you know how much to add. I think Himalayan salt is a little saltier than sea salt. So the most important thing is to salt in layers. We've talked about that a lot. So that means when you're first putting in your food, whether you're seasoning your meat or whether you're going to be cooking up vegetables into a soup or a vegetable dish, you salt them first. So vegetables you would salt lightly, meat you would salt more heavily before cooking. And that's going to enhance the natural flavor and it's going to draw out the moisture. Undersalted food tastes flat. So you want to salt early, you want to salt lightly at the beginning and then in layers as you go. So each step of the cooking process you may want to salt, but definitely at the end if you're going to be blending a soup or finishing off your vegetable dish, etc., finishing off your meat dish, you got to taste and salt at the end as well. So here's a fun little exercise. Take some tomato slices, try them plain, and then try them lightly salted and notice how the water is drawn out of those, which is helpful if you're making a dish with sliced tomatoes. It's helpful to get some of the water out early. And then taste them again with a tiny bit of salt and then properly salted and think about the differences. What do you prefer and what would work well? Say you're making a caprese salad, which is your basil and then your tomato and mozzarella. Your mozzarella is very plain, saltless. It doesn't taste very salty. So then maybe your tomato is better with a bit more salt. You can even put a bit of salt on your mozzarella. But see how the different amounts of salt work. Something is terrible if it's over salted, isn't it? You want to find the balance. So the right amount of salt, but not too much. We're very liberal with salt in our house. Definitely, if I'm cooking a soup, I'll salt the vegetables beforehand and then I'll salt the soup a bit at the end if it needs it. But I think also it's important to think about ways to flavor food without salt. Salt is only the beginning, so you can add a lot using herbs and spices and citrus and fat, etc., to your food. So let's talk about herbs and spices. Fresh herbs are best to add at the end of the cooking process. So things like fresh parsley, fresh basil, cilantro, dill. You're going to be adding parsley to maybe a chicken broth soup, or you're adding basil to basil to a spaghetti bolognese. The bolognese sauce will really be lifted amazingly if you add a little bit of fresh basil and a little bit of fresh garlic at the end of your cooking process. And then other herbs, dried herbs and hardy herbs can be added earlier on to bring their flavor to the meal. Things like rosemary, thyme, oregano. So those you would add to a roast leg of lamb or a stew, a soup, anything that you're going to be cooking with the vegetables in. That's very helpful. When we do meat in the crock pot or the slow cooker, we often add quite a bit of rosemary and thyme to bring that flavor. So your delicate herbs are used to finish, and your woody or hardy herbs, you cook with those. Then spices. I usually use ground spices, so things like smoked paprika or chili powder or onion powder. Guess it's not a true spice. What other spices do we use? Nutmeg, turmeric sometimes. So the general rule with spices is if you're using ground spices, it's nice to bloom them in oil. You can just add them to the meat or whatever you're going to cook as long as it's going to cook for a while after that. But it does enhance the flavor a little bit if you just add them to the oil. And if they're a whole spice, then you need to toast them in a dry pan a little bit to get really good flavor. Cooking the spices briefly before using them releases that aroma. Cumin's another spice. It goes great with chickpeas and hummus, and then also with any vegetarian stew. Nutmeg is great on mushrooms. Just go slow. It's great in cheese fondue or any kind of cheese sauce. Add a little bit of nutmeg and it really brings out the flavor. Chili powder is great in stews and soups. And smoked paprika is great on sweet potato or potato in soups. Red pepper stew red pepper soup goes really well with the smoked paprika. And then smoked paprika is a great element of a Mexican seasoning dish. So if you're going to be doing enchiladas or nachos and you want to add some smoked paprika to your mince or to your chicken or to your general seasoning mix. So seasoning, you need to be careful, but they are best added at the beginning of the cooking process because then they have the time to cook and infuse whatever you're making with their flavor rather than adding them at the end. So layering seasoning, we've spoken about that a few times. What is layering? Let's just revise that a little because it's a very important, probably the most important part of seasoning. So layering means to season at multiple stages. You season your raw ingredients. Say you're going to be making a vegetable soup. You season your ingredients. You season your broth. You cook them up a bit. You season during your cooking and then you adjust at the end. The end you're going to taste and you're going to see, okay, this vegetable soup is good or it needs a little bit more salt. It needs a little bit of brightening with a bit of acid like lemon juice or lemon zest, etc. Here's another example with soup. If you salt your onions while you're sweating them, that helps them to sweat well and taste good. Then you add your broth and you season that. And then after you reduce it, you season again and you finish with the brightening using acid and herbs. Remember, spices are better at the beginning of cooking. Your herbs and your acid are great to add at the end. If you add your herbs near the end of the cooking process, it means they don't get overcooked and kind of killed. They can be fresh. For example, adding some fresh basil leaves to your bolognese, adding some fresh parsley to your chicken broth soup. And then a lot of things really do well with lemon zest and lemon juice at the end. If it's maybe a chickpea vegetable stew or a chicken soup or on top of your fish that's just come out the oven, a little bit of lemon zest is lovely. Or more lemon juice. I'm sure you're used to lemon with fish, lemon butter, etc. Another example is your steak. So you take it out the fridge to come to room temperature for about half an hour. and you can salt it at that point. So you take it out. If we're doing like a fillet, then you're going to wrap it in string to keep it firm, and then you salt your meat, salt and pepper, all the sides, and then you leave it to sit until it's come to room temperature. So you take it out the packaging, season it, and leave it out on the counter. Preferably cover it if you have flies around. Then you're going to sear your meat and season it after that to make sure it's got enough of the right seasoning. Perhaps this is the point you can add your other spices and even some herbs. And then you're going to cook it more, possibly in the oven or in the pan. And then you're going to finish with your flaky salt or something to bring that final kick to your flavoring. So your salt and pepper you're going to use throughout, but spices at the beginning and herbs at the end. Let's talk about specific foods and how to season them. So proteins, your steak, you're going to salt in advance. Either marinate it with oil and seasonings or just add salt, like I said, and leave it at room temperature. Pepper can sometimes be done before searing, but it's probably best after. And then definitely herbs and things after searing. So salt in advance, pepper after searing, and herbs after searing. And then you finish with butter and more herbs. Chicken, it's best to move the skin out the way and season under that a little bit, whether it's a whole chicken or chicken pieces. Don't forget to season the cavity for a whole bird. And it's good if you're going to be cooking a whole chicken in a slow cooker or as a roast, so you can add your herbs and everything at this point. When we do a roast chicken, we probably do salt, pepper, thyme, possibly some rosemary, and then a little bit of onion powder, maybe something else like smoked paprika or chili powder if we're feeling like that. Fish, you season before cooking, and you're going to season well. The more you put on fish before you cook, the better it's going to taste. So we would cook it in the oven, and we would add salt, a little bit of pepper, possibly a little bit of chili powder or onion powder. We would add lots of lemon juice. We would add a little olive oil maybe, and butter, a little bit of butter on top of each piece. Maybe something like ground almonds as a topping, or breadcrumbs if you like that. Just sprinkle them over. So all those things make your fish really good and really well seasoned. You can even add a little bit of tomato paste or tomato puree if you're wanting a tomato flavored chicken. And then you're going to add your acid and your zest after your cooking. So more lemon juice and some zest is lovely on fish after it's cooked. Vegetables, you're going to salt before you roast them, and you're going to add oil. They cook very well with oil and salt. It makes them nice and sweet. If you add that to butternut, etc. Usually, if you are steaming your vegetables, you don't need to add salt or anything until after they're steamed. The steaming process brings out the flavor, and it's really good. And it's good for it to keep the moisture in it. But then you can add some salt after that. But for oven roasted veg, you definitely need that oil and salt to bring out the flavor. For roasting things like butternut, sweet potato, even broccoli, cauliflower in the oven, it's best to do it with a lid on. I've found that if you do it open in the oven, it tends to burn. Perhaps the oven is too hot, but even with a lowish oven, it tends to burn before it's soft all the way through. Whereas if you put a lid on, then it helps it to steam a little bit as well as roasting, and you get a lovely sweet, soft butternut, etc. in the oven. Leafy greens, you would salt after wilting. You can cook them. When I say wilting, I mean in the pan. So you cook them a bit in the pan and then salt them, and add the garlic at a point where it can still cook enough. So it's not going to be raw garlic and then the greens overdone. So your garlic early with the wilting, and then your salt after that. For starches, you're going to, like pasta, you're going to salt your water heavily. Good amount of salt and a little bit of oil to stop it sticking together. I just dip the spoon in the coconut oil. Your sauce should also be seasoned. So with pasta, you're going to make sure your water's seasoned. Then when you drain your pasta, you can add some oil and salt and even some Parmigiano Reggiano to make the pasta taste really good. Your sauce must be seasoned well. Your meat should be seasoned well. You put them all together, and then you can finish with some cheese on top. With rice, it's good to season your cooking liquid, whether it's water or broth, with some salt. And then you cook your rice, and at the end, you can finish off with some herbs or some citrus zest. And sauces and soups, taste them repeatedly. So if they're bland, if you've made a sauce, you've made a soup, and it's a bit bland, then it likely needs salt. If it feels heavy, like it's not such a pleasing flavor, then it often helps to add something like lemon zest or orange zest to lift it. If it tastes sharp, adding a bit of fat helps, like some olive oil. And if it tastes flat, then it may need something like salt and a zest, like an acid, to lift it. So it's good to balance your acid and your sweetness. So acid sauces are lemon juice, zest, vinegar, tomatoes, yogurt even. If you're using sweetness, you usually add honey, sugar, even caramelization, caramelized onion, etc. So you want to make sure that those two things are balanced. Mistakes you want to avoid with seasoning would be only seasoning at the end, not seasoning enough, not tasting during your cooking, and especially not tasting at the end to adjust your seasoning. Over seasoning because of impatience, forgetting the role of acid and just trying more salt when actually it would help to add some citrus, burning your spices or adding spices at the end, and then overusing dried herbs at the finish. I forgot to mention that fresh herbs are great at the finish, but dried herbs are better along the way, like when you're doing lamb or chicken in a crock pot or making a soup or a stew, you need to add your dried herbs at the same time as your spices so they have time to soften and the flavor to be infused. So a quick seasoning by cuisine with a few different cuisines. Italian, you are going to do well with salt, olive oil, acid, and herbs. Mexican, you're going to do well with chilies, chili powder, cumin, and then acid and salt. Indian, layered spices at different times and to each part of the whole, with salt, fat, and a finishing spice of some kind. Japanese, salt and then an umami flavor, subtlety like soy, miso, etc. So what you can do to practice some of these is cook some roast vegetables in the oven, taste them at the end, see what they need. Cook a simple protein in the pan using your seasoning at the beginning and in the middle, and then finishing with your butter and some herbs. Tasting that and seeing how it feels. How was the layering? How did it affect it? What improved its flavor and what made you really like it, or how could you work on improving that? So this was a long one, but I hope that you have some things to try and gain some insight into your food. It's really simple to just be able to taste and adjust as you learn how to do that so that your food can be delicious. Thank you for listening today. I'll see you next time.